Hey, it's Tandy. Welcome to my podcast. So, Google just had their yearly Pixel launch event. This year was much better than last because they had Trevor Noah instead of Jimmy Fallon. Big improvement, but to the consternation of tech enthusiasts, of tech hardware enthusiasts, it's still a lifestyle brand. Pixel is a lifestyle brand. Yes, it started off as a tech enthusiast brand. Get the most powerful hardware for cheaper than the competition, but it hasn't been that for years, and because of that I've heard so much whining year over year about how Google is failing at what they're trying to do, almost as though these hardware enthusiasts don't understand what Google is trying to do. And the thing is that I understand, I get it. I would also like another premium player in our domestic space because we don't have as many OEMs releasing devices in the domestic space. But Google is primarily a services company, not a hardware company. That's not where they make their money. They make a phone that is, yes, a benchmark for what Android can be, but also as a funnel into their services. I have kind of a controversial opinion about the hardware that I'll introduce in a point later. But yeah, Google is a services first company. If you don't like that, understandable. But you can't fight it year over year. If you don't like Google's hardware year over year, then as a hardware enthusiast, stop covering their hardware. It's not your beat. It is a technology beat, and they do have some interesting technology, but maybe that's not your thing. Don't cover it. For instance, Google has a very mature image processing pipeline. Unless the picture that you are taking is of people, which they do saturate and brighten up a little bit, Google skews towards muted colors, and as much scene detail as possible, while also muting the shadows to get that scene detail. There's a function in Google Photos called Enhance. It takes that standard Google photo and uses hosted AI, so it sends it up to the cloud really quickly, to decide on what device changes, so local changes, to make to the photo to make it social media ready. It makes it brighter. It balances light aspects. It makes the image pop more, adds more color. And it does these functions on device. There's no reason it has to send it up to the cloud to make these decisions. The on-device AI and machine learning could easily make these decisions for you. It could actually just be in the photo pipeline. It could be an option for when you're taking pictures. I think they may have added something like that this year. But the reason that they send it up to the cloud is so that they are guaranteed to touch that data for your favorite photos. So they know what your favorite images look like. So they can add it to their billion points of data collection, because Google is a services company and they use those services to collect data. That's their business model. Once again, if you don't like it, understandable, but that's their business model. I agree that Google is overcharging for hardware, but their business model is to subsidize their services with the cost of the device. You are paying for first access to new features. If you don't like that, once again, completely understandable, but the situation hasn't changed in 5 years since Google started to design their own phones. So with that said, I'd like to take a look at some of the complaints from the tech hardware community that not just this year, but have popped up over and over again. Before I go into that, I'd like to say that Google's hardware year was actually last year with the Pixel 10. They released a device that they were like, boom, this is what we can do. They had a brand new SoC that it was designed on a TSMC's fabrication node, so more efficient. It was more powerful than the previous SoC by a degree that is greater than the leaps between the previous versions of the Tensor hardware. They added MagSafe. Pixel Snap is what they call it. They added a telephoto lens on the base model. They added 100 times zoom on the premium model. They made a lot of changes. They added some AI functionality that actually seems like it's useful. People didn't like it. I take that back. It's not that people didn't like it. It's that Apple released changes that year that people had also been waiting for, and they superseded anything that Pixel could do. And also because Apple has such tremendous connections and deals with part suppliers, they were able to double the storage. I think this is bigger than the fact that they added the 120 hertz screen on the base phone. They were able to double their storage at the same price for their base iPhone. That was huge because the phones should all ship with 256 gigs. They are this year. And people are like, oh, that means the price went up. Nope, the price didn't go up. The base model just dropped out, and the price is the same price as it was last year for most devices. So with that said, the big daddy complaint of all complaints from tech enthusiasts is the Tensor SoC, Google's in-house SoC. That's it. At this point, 2 generations behind the competition. The Tensor SoC is 2 generations behind the competition. There are so many complaints of bad design and of how Google is failing at what they're trying to accomplish, but perhaps this is because you don't understand what it is that Google is trying to accomplish. The Tensor SoC is designed to do 3 things specific. The first is to facilitate Gemini-specific local AI machine learning features, mostly image and text recognition. The second, and this one is pure speculation on my part, the one I decided to mention later, but it's to draw as much passive data at very low power as possible. I think this is the true reason that Tensor was made, beyond the price savings, was to be able to collect data passively, because that is Google's business model. Even when the phone is turned off, Google's phones are collecting data for some period of time. I think that Tensor is doing what it's supposed to do, but the third point, and the most important to Google, is that they want Tensor to hit $65 per unit every year. That's what they're gunning for. Some years they hit that, some years they go a little bit over, but $65 per unit. When you're saying that Tensor's failing, at that price, Tensor is probably the most powerful cost per flop, per floating point operation per second SoC on the market. Because if you look at the competition, which is so much more performant, but both the upcoming Apple A20 SoC and the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 are nearing $280 per unit. So much more expensive. Yes, it's not the same class of processor, so I agree that this is too expensive for the value of the hardware model. But once again, you're not paying just for the hardware, you're paying for first access to those services. Google's market share is tiny, so they're putting what they can afford into their devices so they can still meet their expected profit per device. Unlike Apple, or even in some cases Samsung, because Google's market share is so tiny, there's no social mandate that's forcing you to accept this model. You don't have to use Pixel devices. They have a huge marketing budget, but there's no single community where everybody has a Pixel. There are communities where lots of people have Pixels. It's a nice other option, but you don't have to use it. Related to this is the persistent complaint, and I think this complaint is so dumb at this point, that the Tensor SoC will not retain usability for the promised 7 years of security and version support. But we know that, to date, that is not true, and the direct example is the first Tensor. The Pixel 6 series Tensor, the Tensor G1, will have ended its 5 years of support as a more usable and performant phone, or performant SoC, than it was at launch. So the argument kind of falls apart, especially in this moment. In this moment, because of the insane price hikes on components, and it's caused by AI buildup, they're taking all the RAM and all the storage, but because of the insane price hikes, Google, and Microsoft for that matter, are actively working on streamlining their operating systems to work on a larger range of hardware. So the next complaint I've seen is that Google hasn't upgraded their cameras to 1-inch sensors as the Chinese brands have. The Chinese brands have had 1-inch sensors for years, making their phones more like cameras than phones. The thing is that no OEM on the US market has, but because the Pixel line is known for photography specifically, folks think that this specific upgrade is a no-brainer. The thing is that Google is not in competition with the Chinese OEMs. Google is in competition with Motorola, Samsung, and Apple. None of the devices for Motorola, Samsung, and Apple have a 1-inch sensor. All of the big domestic OEMs create their final images with a process-heavy image pipeline, and until the domestic competition goes big glass, Google has nothing to be concerned about, and arguably Pixel still takes the most consistent point-and-shoot image in the greatest variety of circumstances versus the direct competition. And hey, I also do not care for their solution to video that is not quite competitive by uploading the video to the cloud so it can be fixed in post. But again, that falls in line with their business model. Services first. Another big complaint that I saw last year that I would like to slot in here is Google's battery management philosophy. This one is wild to me because I understand what the base of it is. It's Batterygate from 2017. People are mad that Google is managing the battery degradation curve. At 200 charges, Google starts to manage the natural chemical battery degradation curve to 1,000 charges, managing the battery degradation from 100% to 80% battery health / capacity. This is not the same as Batterygate. Batterygate had Apple lowering the capability of the SoC, made it slower so that it wouldn't push the battery as hard as the batteries aged. And that wasn't a solution that people liked. It was one they saw, and Apple tried to hide the fact that they did it until the following year, because in 2016 they were like, Apple's doing this. 2017, Apple's like, yeah, we're doing that. Sorry. No, this is managing a traditional staid lithium-ion battery so that it doesn't explode, or so you don't see significant steep battery drops over that period of time to keep your battery healthier so they can maintain their 7 years of support promise. That's all. Yes, Google should have the silicon carbon batteries at this point. All of the domestic OEMs should, but they don't. And until they do, as a smaller OEM, Google will do what it can to wring performance out of its existing hardware so it can hit its price point. Because it's not a hardware-first company, it's a services-first company. So it's hanging its hat on the services. If you don't like that, understandable, but their model hasn't changed. Alright, so the final complaint that I'd like to address is pricing. As it is, across the board, Google is having to rejigger its prices to meet their desired profit margin. And I think that every company ate the higher prices last year, but year over year it isn't acceptable to their investors. Gotta make that money. The result is minimal. It's minimal. A Pixel 11 and a Pixel 11 Pro with 256 gigs of storage is the same price as a Pixel 10 and a Pixel 10 Pro with 256 gigs of storage respectively. Google dropped the 128 gig SKU of those devices, which is what the tech space was asking for in the first place last year. So the actual hit is that the Pixel 11 Pro XL and the Pixel Fold are $100 more expensive than last year, and that the base SKU for the Pro only gets 12 gigs of RAM versus 16 gigs from the year previous. So from the things I've mentioned, in my opinion, the only real loss is the loss of RAM for the bottom SKUs on the Pro line. It's understandable to complain about that, but it only puts the Pixel in line with the rest of the domestic competition. Once again, I understand why tech enthusiasts are not happy. The Pixel line started out as an enthusiast phone line, offering a premium SoC and camera for less than the competition, but it hasn't been that since 2020. The Google that folks want Google to be never really was, and really hasn't been since 2020. They were searching for a hardware model that could work to sell more devices while making a profit, and they found it to be competing directly with iPhone at first world iPhone prices as a lifestyle brand. Yeah, it sucks if you're into benchmarks, but not necessarily if you're into technology as a whole. Google has the most advanced security isolation technology on the market. Google has the best on-device natural language process. There are gems to be plucked. But if you only want diamonds because ruby red isn't your jam, leave the rubies on the ground and be about your business. And that's all that I have to say about that. Google launched some other products that I don't care about. The tags will be interesting. They don't come out until like October or November or something. So yeah, this is an S year for Google. And people don't want that because they already feel like Google is behind because they don't understand what Google's doing. And that's all I have to say about that. As always, you can catch me on all social media as Jonathan Blade, John, if you want to yell at me because you're a huge hardware fan, as I am too, by the way. Otherwise, hopefully I'll catch you in the next episode, and thanks for listening.